I think my darkest times through running an agency have often been when I've had a coach, but they're not a coach. They've never stepped foot into qualifying as a coach. They're an advisor. And advisors talk about what works for them. And, the only thing you can be sure of is that you are not the same as me. Mm-hmm. And what lights you up will not light me up. Some bits might be the same, but our context is completely different, our skills as well as our strengths. And as soon as you offer advice to someone, a word, you deviate them from their path. And it is so profound, the damage and the impact that can cause. And it can really, really set you off.
No Bullshit Talks is a podcast for entrepreneurs by entrepreneurs. There's too much bullshit out there, especially when it comes to business. This podcast aims to highlight what's true and what's not in the world of entrepreneurship, bringing you honest and raw conversations about the roller coaster that is entrepreneurship. Each week, my guest will be a high-performing entrepreneur sharing the ups and downs of their journey and helping you prepare for the road ahead, while providing you with actionable insights and absolute gems of knowledge. Stay tuned as I introduce this week's guest. Holly Tennock is the founder of a PR agency, which she grew for 14 years before exiting in 2019. She then qualified as an executive coach, so she can now help other agency owners prepare for an exit. She's also now the founder of Wilder Work, which creates impactful, nature-led experiences for teams. I present to you this week's guest, Holly Tennock. So Holly, welcome to No Bullshit Talks. I'm so excited to talk to you today, actually. I feel like there's a lot of questions that I have to ask you, but I know that lots of the audience will also have to ask you, just because of your work that you do now and what you did and your journey that you've been on. So I'm very excited to have you here.
Thank you very much. I'm delighted to be here.
And do you want to tell the audience who you are, what you do?
Yeah. So I'm Holly Tennock. I used to be a political journalist where I started off my career, and I then thought, PR looks like it pays better. So I started off a PR agency when I was 28 without ever having set foot in another PR agency in my life, which might have short-circuited a few things. And then I grew this agency called Journalista for 10 years. And at the end of that, I sold. So I started in 2009, sold it in 2019, just before the pandemic. And then I did a 2-year earn out to a company called ZPB, which is a larger slightly larger marketing and agency, and they wanted to bring in a PR function. And then I left after I finished my earn out, and I started a company called Wild Work. And I also requalified as a coach. So I also coach other agency founders.
Such a wild journey. I'm just like, cool. I'm thinking so many things about that. And, but 10 years though, running an agency, but that's, I totally feel you, because I'm 10 years into my agency journey, and also I never stepped foot in another agency first. And it's definitely not the right thing to do. When you speak to most of the agency owners, they've all been in an agency. They've been a client. Yeah, exactly. And they've seen how it works, and they're like, right, I can do better. Here's what we'll do. But we just sort of delved in, which is like, just finding your own way in agency world is not the easiest, which we'll definitely come to. But I want to start at the very beginning, because political journalism... Yeah. Tell me more about that. Like, what sort of stories did you work on and stuff?
I actually started off in the NHS and started working there. And as they were doing a bunch of reforms, my job became redundant. And I thought, well, I never really wanted to be in HR, in strategic HR in the NHS. Always really wanted to be a journalist. So I took that opportunity to contact the Trade Industry magazine, and got in touch and went down there and started writing stories for them quite quickly, because I had that deeper understanding of the NHS and how it worked. Also a pretty good writer. But, started where most people do. I used to get bags of tapes and that they would send to me, and I would spend all night transcribing them. So,
oh my God.
So I used to get paid to do that. So no one wanted to do that. And I learned how people ask questions, I learned how to phrase things in a way that was good for people to read. I was getting feedback directly, and then I'd go into the HSJ offices, which were then at Mornington Crescent. I'd get in early, and good or bad, terrible people pleaser, I would take all of the disgusting cups that were all over their offices that looked like they hadn't been touched for about a millennia. I'd wash them all up. So they used to have lots of work experience, but I was the work experience person that just got in a bit early, sorted stuff out, and tried to make an impression. And as a result, I got quite a lot of freelance. I think, I'd also like to think it wasn't my washing up, it was great right to. I started to get quite a lot of paid freelance work then, which then made me go and qualify as a journalist, specialising in what they're called like periodical magazines. So, and then I got a job working for a magazine called Regeneration and Renewal, which was very focused on, which at that time was sort of a lot of the politics and economics around regenerating some of the sort of more like less prosperous areas of the country. And I spent a lot of time going up to like former coal mine areas, lots of time in Sheffield, understanding how some of the money, European money, was being spent, questioning how it was being spent, triangulating that with how the councils were wanting things to be spent, how it felt on the ground, and did some really lovely pieces, exposing some of the things that were going on at the time, which I'd say are still reverberating now. I think one thing that strikes me as we having these absolutely horrendous marches and protests across the country was one of the stories that I wrote when I was up in Sheffield, which was about sports soccer, getting an enormous EU grant to come and bring jobs to an area that had like second generation joblessness in that area after the coal mines were shut. So your dad didn't work, and then consequently you've never seen anyone go out to work as an 18, 19-year-old. So turns out you don't work either. Yeah. And so sports soccer were given a load of money by the EU to build these big warehouses and factories on these brownfield sites. So much like good news about there's going to be loads of jobs brought into this area. When the job ads went out, they were only in Polish. They didn't, under EU legislation, they didn't have to publish those job ads in English. So only Polish people could apply for those roles, and nobody locally got them.
That's ridiculous.
It's legal.
That's bizarre though.
Yeah. And I think when you sometimes delve into the context around why people feel the way they do and why we had Brexit, people rarely talk about those stories. I am anti-Brexit, I'm very left-wing, but I think working on those stories gave me much more compassion and understanding about how it actually is to live in these areas that are, are generationally poor and have been systematically deprived of all of the opportunities that you and I would have had growing up in London, in more affluent areas. I'm from Skelmersdale myself, which is one of the biggest council estates in the UK and one of the worst. But my family, my parents had me very young. My dad got a PhD in criminology and moved down to the Home Office. So I've had the gift of seeing two sides. So I really enjoyed that job as a journalist, and I felt like I had a lot of empathy and understanding that I could bring to it.
That's amazing. I do feel like the journalism is a really interesting place to go. I'd be fascinated to do journalism, but I think that journalists have a really bad rap, right? Because they look like they're just sort of cutthroat, they'll do anything for a story sort of thing. And how much of that is accurate, I guess?
Oh my God.
Really?
It's such an interesting industry.
Yeah.
I went on to call my agency Journalista because I wanted that more cutthroat, that more abrasive, simple focus really on the story and the power of the truth and a strong narrative to come through into PR, which for me, I had never set foot in an agency, I'd never been a client, I'd certainly been the journalist getting a load of woolly nonsense from journalists and just thought, from PRs and thinking, what is this? There's a story hidden in here somewhere, maybe.
It's all marketing stuff instead.
Pick up the phone and talk to the people behind the story and get something really powerful, often that was far better for the organisation they're putting out themselves. So did they get a bad rap? I mean, it certainly didn't teach me to be a good manager. Yeah, I always thought that I was being a good manager because I wasn't screaming at people, printing out their copy and ripping it up in front of them before 9 o'clock in the morning, sending them emails in capital letters in red. It was, I worked on a pretty chill periodical, and I once saw my news editor and features editor have a physical fight. I mean, they're both quite geeky guys. It was quite horrifying, but not for the reasons you might be thinking.
Yeah.
And it was all ego. It was all ego. And, I remember I met Ed Miliband. I had a really good chat with him. I met his special advisor, and we had been trying to get an interview with him for quite a while on the desk. And the next day they contacted me and were like, we'd really love to do a story with Holly. And my features editor jumped in and was like, I want that story, and was very bravado about it. And I think I just thought, well, if you want it, if it's really important to you, have it. And I regret that to this day.
Yeah, and that's you are that
baby thing to you.
Yeah.
And I think, and it was, I wish I had backed myself more. I've had a lot of confidence. I got the job because I was sort of asked a lot of questions that were seen quite forthright compared to my peers. That was the feedback I got. And I wasn't afraid to put my hand up. We'll now be sitting with, the transport editor at the Times, and but they're mostly men in my sector, and I'd be arm up, no, stand up. I'd often go and grab the minister at the end, but yeah, I definitely could have backed myself more and got some better stories. It's quite an ego male driven place.
Yeah, and I think that you were quite young though, what you said. So if you started your agency at 28, you would obviously be younger than that. And I think that especially back then, I feel like the world's a little bit more open to sort of, standing up for yourself and having more of an outspoken thing. It was so hierarchical back then, right? And it's like, if you say one thing and you're subordinate, that's like, you're fired sort of thing. And it's like your job's at risk and you're just a 20-something. It's hard.
Me and a lot of the people that I worked with would get barked at by one of the editors, really what you would now call bullying, and they'd be hauled up in front of HR, and you'd go and have a sob in the loo, get a wet paper towel, pat your face down, put your face under the dryer, and feel massive shame for the fact that, you had a bit of a blotchy face. I remember, I'm a crier. So, I think, as much as I would then give it some on the other side, it was quite it was your copy is 100 words over, this is how you failed today, sort of missive.
How do you deal with so much criticism and negativity? Because doesn't it just wear down on your confidence? You said you were a confident person, but surely at the end of just consistently hearing how you failed, not okay, great, that's great, Holly, you're amazing, you've done really well here, but here's how you can improve. It's you're a failure and this way. Doesn't it just erode all your confidence?
So I think that's where culture comes in, and I think it's who's setting the culture. So even though there are a few characters on the desk, I would say the culture of that magazine was gorgeous. My news editor would drop me a little text at the end of the day saying, great colour in that quote, Holly. He would back me to the hill.
Okay.
He was, and his editor was, wouldn't say boo to a goose, although he had this sort of stoic resilience. And then one of the other editors was just a bit meek, but incredibly intelligent. So I think that's the thing about culture, right? That sense of, actually, here we are, you can have a few bad eggs if you overall, I think what you're hearing is positive, and then I think it can build resilience. And I think for me, actually, it didn't erode my confidence. It did build my resilience, and I got a few good stories to tell. I think that's how you focus. I think randomly, what really just pissed me off to the point of leaving was, the pay was low, really low. And especially because I'd been in the NHS and then I'd actually taken a comms role for the RCN. So I was paid pretty well. And then I had to take a 10K pay cut after doing a qualification to go and be a journalist. And then looking at, what was interesting is the levels weren't shown, who gets paid when and how you do. I had a lot of debt from uni. I needed to know how I could scale, when I could pay it back. And there was nowhere to find that out really. And it seemed very slow. And, and I think the other thing was, I randomly, I always used to get a rail pass, which would reduce my rail fare, which I passed on to the company. And then they randomly said, oh, we're not paying for that. But I I'm a bit like that. So it was snapped at me. I was like, that's just so nonsense. And it just added to that overall sense of, I'm working my ass off. I'm never going to get paid for it. I'm feeling really skint. I can't go out for dinner with my mates. And I went and took a PR job for 20k more, in a council. I regretted it as soon as I did. I was yeah.
So, cause I feel like, a lot of people who are out there at the moment, especially now, everyone's kind of becoming a content creator, doing entrepreneurship. And that's obviously a reason why I do this podcast. There's a lot of people who are there are obviously lots of people who are business owners watching it, but there's also a lot of budding people who want to try and learn and be like, how do I set up my business? They're in a current job. They're like, do I leave? And, and they're sort of, and so listening to you say that, you were like, okay, I snapped, there's one last straw, usually unhappy, and then one last thing, just be like, I'm not doing it anymore. But then you were saying you went into a PR job and you regretted that. So what made you regret that though?
I then went and worked for a council that was overseeing other councils. It was called London Councils. And at the time it had a Tory majority. And a lot of the stories I was writing were really against my values. So they were things like, increased numbers of migrants mean that we can't count how many people are at the GP surgeries and all this sort of stuff. And I was just chewing on wasps to write those sorts of, and to write those sorts of press releases. Even though I could do a good job, I just felt an intense loathing for what I was doing. And I think I would say that at every decision that I've made in my career, where I have taken a salary step down, it's been the right one. Interesting though.
It's really interesting. I think this is what I've started to realize as well. I always give this advice to people because every time I've taken on a client that I thought wasn't right for me, but they had decent budget, I've regretted it. And they actually end up treating you badly. You end up resenting yourself. You resent the work if they don't align with your values. And actually the ones that you really believe in them and you want to help them, you don't mind how little you get paid if it's worthwhile. Well, to an extent, obviously, you got to get paid roughly enough.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'd say often the bigger the client, sometimes, the more professional they are, and sometimes the less the problem.
Yeah.
Sometimes our biggest problems have been from our smallest clients. So
yeah, I guess it does depend.
I think it's just I suppose it's just that overall theme of follow your interest.
Yeah.
And the money will come.
And your values.
And your values.
For me, that's the most important thing. It's you have to resonate with that company and you have to believe in what it is. Otherwise, if you're writing stories or whatever your job you're doing, you're creating content, because a lot of people come to me about content and they ask me about brand partnerships. And I think that I always say don't accept money from a brand that you just wouldn't use yourself or things like that. It has to be that alignment. You just end up resenting yourself.
Absolutely. And I think one message I give to my younger self is, if you've walked in a door to the wrong room, walk.
Yeah.
No
shame doing it.
No, I think so many times I've met, we all make the wrong decisions. We take the wrong career path. We do this. But then you feel like, okay, I'm in this room now. I've got to stay here. And I think if I had just gone, oh my God, I made the wrong decision and stepped back into journalism, I think I'd have been a lot happier. And, and I think I would have possibly then spent a bit longer at a career I really loved and been able to use more of those skills in an even more comprehensive way in what I did in my later career. I mean, no regrets. I'm happy with where I am. I really do think, if you walk in the wrong door, get out. Don't, same for relationships, same for friendships. Just because you've had a go, I think sometimes I would, I berate myself for not being a complete finisher, but then also I wasn't happy running my agency from about year 6. I did another 4 years and then 2 years of an earnout. Your life is short,
It's that sunk cost fallacy.
Absolutely.
It's just that everyone's sort of well, I've committed to it now. It'd be such a waste of time if I don't just see it through, or they'll see it as a weakness that you're quitting.
Yeah.
Quitting seems to be a really negative word, and people just oh, you're weak and you're a quitter, and and I just think, do you know what? You're stronger if you can say this isn't right for me. I'm moving on, because it's easy to stay in and just ignore it.
How brave that you just took a foot in a path rather than sitting somewhere afraid to take a path. If you are brave, you're going to walk into a few wrong doors.
Yes.
And it's okay to then go, oh, sorry, I don't like the business room. Okay.
Yeah. I think that's way stronger. Whereas it's very easy to just sit there and just like, see it through and be pained inside. All you're doing is hurting yourself. And people do that, but they're just,
as you're forcing yourself into something you don't necessarily want to be in order to fit the place you've walked into.
It's nuts. I just think so many people do it because they're so embarrassed about their image and what they want. They're sacrificing their own happiness for this. But tell me about journalista, because obviously you did this. You didn't enjoy that particular job, but you were like, right, PR obviously pays a lot more money.
Yeah.
But like, I don't like this company or the council or the stories, so I want to do it myself. So tell me like that.
There was a step in the middle. So about 6-9 months into being at London Councils, a job came up working for the European Parliament. And it was a job working... it was a job working in Strasbourg, in Brussels, and in the UK working from home. So that it came with a lot of freedom. It came with a big expense budget, as the did at that time. And I jumped into it with both feet, got the job and loved it. I was in Brussels for a week. I was in Strasbourg. I spoke French at school, so it was nice to pick that back up. And it was that lovely combination of politics, which is my heartland. Like, I was a member of the Labour Party when I was 7, and then also like lots of writing, and then also lots of PR. And that's probably where I learned my PR skills. So I was working for a number of the committees out there, and I worked for the Women and Gender Equality Committee. And what you used to get back then were these sort of big, like multilingual press offices that the copy they put out, you'd have needed a microscope to find the story in that, and a lot of the content was very dry. So I had a lovely job of taking some of this dry stuff and sitting in the committees and just finding the juice. And so where that was, for example, the Women and Gender Equalities Committee was putting something about changing in advertising legislation, blah, 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 to be less sexist or something, and all like, these thousands of pages of numerous numbers. I was like, how can we make this into something that people want to read? How can we make a positive story about the EU actually doing something interesting? So I went and found a load of these like really sexist European adverts, where it's like women in short skirts in Poland bending over doing the cleaning. And I got a whole collection of them together and sort of showed what was now becoming illegal through this legislation, also how some of the things in England, and really pictorially told this story. And it was across every single broadsheet, tabloid, and they all ran with it. And the press office were like, what? We've never had this sort of coverage or pickup. And I was just like, just think of it through, like, what do you want to read? Like, you don't want to read that. You want to look at this. And I then got a bit of a reputation as being able to turn like that, those sorts of stories into something the media liked. And I went to lots of lovely dinner parties where it literally felt like the guy was going to come out like Ferrero Rocher. It was, people suddenly play the piano, and it's like all these, and I was like, this is great. I really enjoyed myself in that job. And then the opportunity came to get paid instead of like as a salary, but as a contractor for that role. And so in a way, they went and became my first client. And so I was able to start up an agency off the back of the reputation that I built there. But very quickly, the laws changed. So it then couldn't be seen to be paying an external lobbying company for what it was doing. And then it had to become a more internal job again. So it gave me that push into being able to start something off with the first client, making my first hire. But then I was then sort of reverted back to my heartland, really, which was the NHS, which I knew really well. I had sort of lots of contacts there from my days there. And I contacted a few of the health wellbeing boards that I knew were looking for PR at the time, and got some fairly sizable contracts, like $6,000 a month, like that.
Nice.
And yeah, went from there, hired a few people, didn't look back.
So I think like when I'm listening to this, because I think like so many people are really struggling to whether they should start their own thing, and agency world is really tough. And I think that anything to do with services, like in a way, services businesses is easier to start than a product business because you don't have any of the overheads and costs and everything. But like, what I've heard is that the ones who seem to do quite well is exactly like you said. They already have this big client that they can take through. Yeah. So like I've like lots of people who have, you know, seem to have grown their agency from 0 to hero in like 3 months. It isn't that quite how it is. It's the fact that they were in an agency and they took their biggest clients with them, and that suddenly became their clients in a tiny agency, and obviously then they were able to scale. I think that's a great head start. But if you don't have that, it's obviously a little bit different. So like for those who are listening thinking, I want to start my company, would you say like it is a good idea to sort of build on the original contacts you have? Because I feel like, I said, most of the people do well. It's the fact that they've got these contacts in their original jobs, and like, how would they do that transition, do you think?
So I think if you're not starting an agency with a client or someone that you know, I think then it depends. Like, are you just starting it as a freelancer looking to scale? Yeah. You know, what becomes really hard is how do you make the leap from being a freelancer where you can, you know, probably take on about 150, 200 Ks worth of work quite comfortably, to thinking, actually, I'm going to hire people now and we're going to do that. And I think that's where the messy changes.
I agree. And I think that there's a really weird thing now that's happening in agency world, is that I meet so many people now. I was at a dinner the other day and half the table were like, I've just started my own agency. And I'm like, why is everyone starting their own agency? Like, we've been through it. We're like, get away from agency. Not quite, but it's tough. It's really hard work. And I get this question a lot. And they go, should I stay freelance or should I run an agency? And I'm like, always asking, what do you want? Why do you want to start an agency? When I speak to all these newly founded agency owners, it's just them. And I'm like, are you really an agency? And when I wrote a post once on LinkedIn about saying that all these people call themselves an agency, they're one person. They're like, why can't we be a one-person agency? I was like, to me, that's not an agency. You're still a freelancer. Sure, you might want to scale, you might want to do things, but if you're one person, you can't, by definition, be an agency. You are a freelancer, a sole trader, however you want to call it. You might be a business owner, but you are by yourself, so you can't be an agency. You might be, I think people are outsourcing stuff to other people. It's a different model, though, and it's not quite the same thing. And so I think that that's why I find it really bizarre that people are like, you know, people are starting out, I think they get attached with this term agency, like it's got some sort of status and kudos behind it, I think. But there is nothing wrong with just being a freelancer or a consultant or whatever it is.
There's nothing wrong.
Yeah.
I think it's about ego.
Yeah.
And I think it's one for you to say that. I think Adam Rubin, who's on your podcast, put this really well. I think whether you are being in a lifestyle business or looking to sound like, it's about being intentional. So if you want to start an agency, that really isn't, an agency has its culture. You know, and I think, again, coming back to that, like, what is it if you leave? Like, that has to be something. Yes. Otherwise, it is not an agency.
Yeah.
You know, it is. And there's, you know, I think somebody got into a bit of trouble recently. I think it's the one who did Axe and Saw for saying, like, freelancers, you know, a freelancer only model doesn't make an agency. Mm-hmm. And I'd agree with that too.
That's basically what I'm saying, right? I don't.
If you've got freelancers, even if they're working for you 4 days a week, you're still not an agency.
Yeah.
I think you have to have some. I think an agency means you've got a pretty decent you've got a P&L bill. Mm-hmm. I think until you have not P&L, PAYE bill, you know, and that means that you've got to have, you know, constant new business, marketing. You've got to straddle these feet, and you've also got different talents that are entirely only available through that agency. Who cares? Call yourself what you want. I mean, I really am at that point.
Yeah.
I think you're fooling yourself if you think it's a hiding to somewhere, unless you're really going to push past a certain threshold. I think, you know, certain threshold, you're just going to earn way more money being a freelancer, have such a lot less headache, and probably have, you know, actually be able to go on holiday, having better time with it.
It's so, and it's so interesting. And like, obviously we've both been through it. And I was at an event and I was on a panel, and one of the ladies asked me, she was like, so when, like, you know, I want to start my own agency. So I said, why?
Yeah.
And because I mean, I just, the person was like, well, why? Because people think that's the thing that they're like, because that's what I want to do. I was like, but why? She's like, I want more freedom. I was like, you're going to get the opposite. I was like, you're a freelancer now. You're getting a decent amount of work. And she was like, yeah, I'm getting lots of clients. It's manageable. I was like, okay. She was like, I want to spend more time with my kids. So you're not going to have any time. I was like, when you become from a freelancer to an agency, you're then having to look after all your staff. Like I said, you're creating a culture. You have to put out every fire. When you add more people to the mix, there's just more problems. Yeah. And then obviously you need more revenue. You've got all these overheads. You've got to think about, do you want an office? Even if you don't want an office, you still have to make sure your team have got somewhere nice to work. And you have to have all these other benefits. You have to pay sick pay. You have to manage all the internal problems. There's a whole load of other stuff. And actually, you won't get that freedom. So you have to want to run an agency for a completely different reason. You have to have a vision for this bigger picture, for some bigger entity, for whatever reason that is. Yeah. And at some point, I thought that's what I wanted. I thought that because I was freelancing for 5 years, I did really well from it. Yeah. I had so many clients like, well, I must hire people. And that's the sort of natural progression. And then I sort of just stumbled into hiring people. I didn't really think I had an agency. I had a lifestyle business and that was okay. And actually, I really enjoyed it. It was small, it was nice, it was fun, it was manageable, it wasn't that stressful. We were so profitable. And then I started going to other agency events and I met these agency coaches and I met all these people who were telling me, you cannot run a lifestyle business. It is bad. You must grow to scale. You must exit. You must do this, go on this growth plan. And I joined all these masterminds. I learned all the things to become a real agency. And it was the worst thing I've ever done. It was only headaches. It was more expensive. It was more stressful. My mental health went to shit. Like, it was honestly the worst thing I've ever done. And I did that for a solid 3 years or 4 years or something in the end, because I thought I wanted to commit to that. The moment, I wanted to give up for a start, but the moment I transitioned back and I was like, screw this, I'm going to downsize and become a lifestyle business, I was so much happier. And I just think, you have to do what's right for you. And all I ever wanted was to create a company where people were happy to come to. They enjoyed it as much as you can enjoy work. Like, they enjoyed being part of a team that was small, that liked each other, enjoyed each other's company. Much like I'm trying to do with Knobs. You were just so happy to be and support each other. And I want everyone to earn a decent amount of money, us to make enough profit, and all of us to have decent lifestyles and not be stressed at night, work with nice clients, call it whatever you want to call it, like I said. But that's what I wanted. I don't care if it's called an agency or not. And I just don't see what's wrong with that.
Oh, I mean, I feel your pain. I feel your pain. I think my darkest times through running an agency have often been when I've had a coach, but they're not a coach. They've never stepped foot into qualifying as a coach. They're an advisor. And advisors talk about what works for them. And, the only thing you can be sure of is that you are not the same as me. Mm-hmm. And what lights you up will not light me up. Some bits might be the same, but our context is completely different, our skills as well as our strengths. And as soon as you offer advice to someone, a word, you deviate them from their path. And it is so profound, the damage and the impact that can cause. And it can really, really set you off on a sort of, off course, as it sounds like it has here. And I'm so sorry, it is. And that's so much of my passion in what I do now. I now coach agencies. I do not advise them. Occasionally I will, I qualify as a coach advisor. I will very occasionally, if it's something about a P&L, say something like, have you thought about that? Or what about this? But as soon as I've offered that, my next word is, does that resonate with you? Does that make any sense? And they go straight into asking questions. It's like, it is, and it's so powerful how, if I'm ever tempted to give a word of advice, if I just hold myself back, and actually ask some more questions and dig deeper and look at what you're not saying, what you say as your advice to yourself is so much more profound, so much more on point, so much more in line with your values and journey than anything I could ever say. And my heart breaks every time a little bit for the chance that, for the money I was spending on people to coach me and instead were just knocking me off. I had a coach for years. I'd literally come out and cry because I felt so low about what I was achieving. And I used to think, and I said that to her, and she was like, oh, she was actually quite concerned. But I was like, no, it's great. I need to have my ego knocked down a bit. I need to do this. Like, no, I didn't. No. I was doing so well. But I think, through school, through the way we've been brought up, like, we think that we need to focus on what we're not good at. It's absolutely, it is bullshit. What we need to do is focus on the few things that we do really well, excel on those, and then pull back from the stuff we don't do well. And that's why an agency is great at its heart. If you're able to go, I do these things amazingly, they do those, and we work as a team, and between all of us, we've really got this. That is a proper awesome agency. And that's when I get really passionate about agencies and like steering people there.
So I would like to then discuss, because I think what you said resonates, and it's really scary actually, because I feel like companies get to a certain size and then they're like, I need advisors.
Yeah.
And, you're told, and because this is the way that every business runs, you're told to get a board, get advisors and whatever. And like you said, they could really destroy businesses.
Yeah.
And I know so many companies have had a board of advisors and they've been awful.
Yeah.
So I would like to just touch on coaches versus mentors versus advisors, because they're sort of so murky and people just interchange all three of those words as the same thing, but they are so different, and what they should be getting out of you is very, very different. So I'd love to talk on the differences, because you're a qualified coach. So coaching, what is coaching versus what is mentoring versus what is advice, and who should be getting what?
Brilliant. So such a good question, and one that needs to be sweated a bit more. And actually, so I did a course specifically in this to really chunk it out. Because so I'd say a coach, first of all, is someone who does not proffer advice. They are there to deeply listen, hold space, and they could have loads of often they would have a load of experience in your area, but not necessarily. But they would ask you questions, and there's lots of different styles of coaching, as there are sort of psychological therapy, and there's a connection between the two. It's quite a lot of research and scientific backing in the same that there is in psychological counselling. Very clear line between what is counselling, what is therapy. But they're really only there to ask you questions, and to ask the right question, and to notice, and they might say things like, I noticed you grabbed your throat when you spoke about that. Tell me about that a bit more. Or I noticed when you answered that, you didn't mention this. So they might be drawing your attention to things. They might, but they're never saying, I think you need to do this. They are really, really drawing out from you your best self. And they might be aligning you with your values. They might be aligning with your goals. The fundamental thing about coaching is always forward looking. Whereas therapy, I think, is a lot looking back. What coaching is about where are you going? And you can do some of that is like Gestalt, which is very sort of in the body, noticing where you're feeling things. Some of it is like just very functional, like what are your goals, what's the reality, opportunity, way forward. So there's lots of different models, but good coaches are able to use a whole range of different models interchangeably, depending on what the situation is. So the important thing is all coaches are accredited. So there's two bodies, the EMCC and the ICF. And you have to keep up your registration, you have to pay, you have to have a mentor, you have to, write up your notes after every session. You need to then put those through with people. Wow. It's a very, it is a accredited profession.
Well, it should be anyway. But then 90% of the coaches on Instagram, for example,
not
popping up. Exactly.
And I think that's the thing, because coaching came from like sports coaching, perhaps, and a lot of things we didn't necessarily need a qualification. Yeah. Really, if you are going to pay for a coach, you need to make sure they're accredited, because they can cause an enormous amount of harm, and you should contract with them very carefully at the beginning around all of that.
And would you say that those two bodies, I'll write those in the show notes, would you say to go to those websites, look up their names and make sure they've got their accreditation before engaging with them?
They should send you over their professional registration. Absolutely. I mean, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to be an amazing coach for you. Yeah. Definitely work on like recommendations in your network, talk around to people, have a conversation with someone first. And the interesting thing is, I think if I reflect on all the coaches I've had that are amazing in my career, sometimes the one that you don't necessarily have the most chemistry with can be the best one.
Yeah.
So, sometimes, you might be naturally drawn to somebody who's really like similar to you, because we are drawn to those. Sometimes a coach is a little bit different than you, can also bring out a whole new range of skills. So really align the coach you're looking for with what you want to become, and really make sure you really question them and be really clear on how many sessions you're signing up for, what the notice period is, what the way to get out is, because often some coaches still also have these quite lengthy ways of getting in and out. I'm more than happy to talk about this to anyone who's interested, because it's something I'm so passionate about. Now, an advisor, anyone can be an advisor.
Okay.
So, you don't need formal qualification. I suppose what you would look for is, I think the number one rule of advice is don't take advice from anyone you don't want to be like. So if you are, if you're looking at somebody for advice, make sure that you really want to follow in their footsteps, because that's where it's going to take you. And it might not even do that, because they could be talking about something they did under a set of circumstances 5 years ago with a totally different skill set. So I would say with advice, sometimes it can be more helpful to get someone who's quite similar to you.
Yeah.
So if you've got similar strengths to someone, if you've got a similar knowledge, if you've got, that could be helpful. Or, you can get legal advice. Just, and there's advices where someone says, I think you should do this. Mm-hmm. The really important thing about advice is just to take it lightly, and I think if I ever offer someone advice, I don't offer it to them like I give them a nice glass of Chardonnay, or, so I here you go, try this and try this. I often would offer, I'd offer them a lukewarm glass of water I've just poured out the tap. Take it, don't take it, I don't care. That's the best way to offer advice. Yeah. I think really what's far more important after you've offered advice is to say, what do you think of that? What does that mean to you? If I was to say to you, Sabrina, I think you should get another advisor. Mm-hmm. And then rather than me going, I want the ego trip, if you go, wow, that's great advice, the best advisors would say, what does that spark up for you when I say that? And I think if you combine advice and coaching in that way, it's really powerful. Yeah. Because you might go, God, that's the last thing I want to do. Yeah. That's really interesting. Yeah. Far more interesting than you going, thanks, Holly, for letting me know that. So if you're ever getting an advisor, make sure it's done like a lukewarm.
I get the difference between coaching and advising now, but mentoring, I think, should be a little bit both, right? Or no, actually, can you say mentoring is more for determination, coaching is asking questions, advice is suggesting something, but mentoring is talking about your experience, right? And say, this is what I did, but,
Absolutely. So I think coaching is about inquiry, curiosity, deep listening at its heart. Deep listening to try and uncover what's going on for you below the surface and try and pull through that in the forward direction that you want to go to. Advice, suggestions, things that you could choose, like a box of chocolates you can choose from. Now, I would say mentoring is perspective. Mm-hmm. So mentoring it could be reverse mentoring, so it could be, you're getting a glimpse through their eyes. Mm-hmm. And also in a way, that person is, whether they're coming, if I was mentoring you, all you're doing is having a chance to look through my eyes. And I would say, what can I see from my opinion? What do I remember from there? Mm. It's like storytelling and sharing, really. And that is phenomenally powerful. I think how we're sharing stories and caring about each other here, mentoring, I definitely think has a more caring element sometimes. I care that you see my perspective. I care that I share my perspective with you.
I think mentoring is so, so powerful. And I actually believe that anyone can get mentoring. Yeah. Whereas I feel like the other ones are a little bit different. And I want to cover this because I feel like almost anyone can get a mentor. I think everyone should get a mentor. And I just think that it's so beneficial to everyone, but it's really hard to find the right mentor. So talking through again, coaching, advisory and mentoring, because I think that lots of people now are on a bit of a self-development journey. They want to learn more. They actually want to learn more. They don't know which one to get and when and why, for what reasons. So can we have a bit of guidance here? Because I feel like people sort of go, I'd love to have a mentor, but actually, no, I need a coach. Or wait, do I need an advisory board? Like, what do people need at which stages, do you think?
Great question. And you don't need to limit yourself to having one. But I definitely think you need to have the energy to commit fully to whatever one you have. I would say coaching and mentoring are more long-term. You know, I think you can dip in and out of advice and it should be seen as that. You know, you can go and get some advice and then you can take it or leave it. You know, people have like long-term advisors that give them very wise counsel, you know, and that is a long relationship where they understand a lot about the business. So it's not to say that advice is short-term, but I think there's definitely a level of commitment possibly on the other two sides that's necessary to sort of get the value out of it. And so that's a really great question. I mean, I'm sure, I think coaching can help you unlock. Coaching is more internal. So I think if you are feeling like the issue is you, you know, and actually and you're holding yourself back, then coaching is really helpful. Like if you want to unpick yourself to do that, I think advice is more external. So it's much more like, I need to, you know, it's like, how do I change my environment? How do I navigate this tricky situation? How do I look at this new context? I need more external, you know, influences in. And I think mentoring is more, again, probably more, you know, I think it can be the mixture between the two, depending on where it is. I think, you know, if you're doing, if you're getting mentoring from the perspective of people below you in the business, that's giving you that super valuable perspective. You know, if you're getting mentored by somebody in a role 1 or 2 above you, that's really helpful to see how they see your role and what they do to do there. So that again, and they might help you unpick a little bit of the problems you're having. They're really sophisticated mentor, but that's getting more into coaching.
Yeah, so definitely.
So yeah, I think when I was running my business towards the end, I felt like I had this constant feeling like I was steering a ship with a broken arm. And so every time I was trying to sort of steer it, I'd re-break the arm. So I had this like really strong metaphor. And I think for me, coaching is really helpful to start unpicking that and give myself the permission to explore what a future might be like, where, you know, and actually, as I did about 2 years worth of coaching before I then sold my agency. And my coach at the end of it was like, I think you need therapy. You know, so that was quite helpful as well and took me on that journey beyond there. But, you know, really shone a light at some of the things that I had quite entrenched within me that I don't think that without her coaching, I would ever have started to unpick. So yeah, I think coaching can just be completely transformational.
I think that for me, when I think about it, coaching helps you, like, because you're asking questions, right? So it helps you discover something about yourself, like I said, is internal. So I feel like it's a bit of a self-discovery thing. You want to do that. And then like advice, like I said, is almost like, I've got this problem, how do I solve it? And then mentoring is almost like inspirational. So I feel like it's kind of nice like that. And that's how I would see it. Like so you can also need all three, like, you know, at some point.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think that's a really lovely summary. Really lovely. Good explanation by you. I summarised it. I think coaching as well, it's important to realise like some of the best coaches might have absolutely no experience of your industry. Yeah. You know, and you know, that's much more organic. And I think they're just going to keep peeling the layers until they find the bit underneath.
Yeah. And you said that you did a couple of years of coaching, then you before you sold your agency. And I definitely want to talk about this because I feel like we were saying on the Adam's episode of the podcast, he was talking about he was selling his agency. And every time I've spoken to someone now about selling their agency, it's not as it seems. And I know that it's like I said, when I was undergoing this, I don't know what that was, advice, coaching, mentor, whatever that guy was doing, like they were telling me that this is what I need to do in my agency. And so much of agency world is all about the exit. And I know there's a lot with other businesses as well. Like I guess in fintech, it's quite a big thing. You want to sell your business. But tell me through your about your journey, because I feel like you also didn't necessarily enjoy it, and it was a very tough time.
Yeah.
So talk me through, I guess, why you wanted to exit and then what happened.
Yeah. Thank you. So I think I remember writing this LinkedIn post. I wrote it as an article when I got to 10 years. And I was, I had been planning this sort of, I thought I really need to celebrate turning 10 years. And I could not find it in me what to celebrate. I was so down on myself. And the agent, and actually I feel really guilty. I had a brilliant team. We were turning over great profit. We had great clients. I think I just had no drive in me to celebrate or I just couldn't, I didn't feel proud of myself at all. And I was just, and actually what was really helpful, I went to a networking event, where you sit down and have lunch. And this guy was up at the front talking about male mental health and how that was such a problem. I could feel myself getting rage about it. And this woman took me afterwards, and she had built and sold an agency, and she said to me, "You're burnt out." And at the time, no one said that word, and I didn't really know what it meant. And I Googled it a bit, and I was suddenly like, "Oh God, tick. I just had no passion, something I used to be so passionate about, couldn't make a decision. And then I had brought in a managing director with this view to that, they're incredibly talented, from a really successful brand, and we just clashed, and I just couldn't work out what she was about, and I felt quite exposed because actually I think I was pretty burnt out at that time and I couldn't give her what she wanted. And so when she left, it was just oh God, there's nothing left in the tank. And so what I didn't realise at that time as well is, I had loads of other stuff going on in my history that sort of made more sense as to why I felt like that. But I was just, I'd had 2 little kids, I'd had no mat leave, and I was just kind of done. So I was thinking, rather than just taking 2 weeks off, which probably would have been quite helpful, I then was looking for solutions, and I went out and met with somebody I knew who ran an agency. One thing led to another, and she suggested that she bought my agency, and then we went into negotiations, and that all happened quite quickly. So I think, what I just was completely unable to see at that point. I think, now I coach other agencies. I'm like, wow, we were so profitable. We had loads of money in the bank. We had great clients. Some of them were on 3-year locked in contracts, government contracts. And I think I just couldn't see how good things were. It was interesting. I did have a coach then who was really powerful, but I think as well, she was sort of stimulated by the fact she only asked questions. And actually an advisor and some more advice would have been helpful. But sometimes you just navigate with what you had. And because I think the agency was in such a good position, we very quickly went into a sales arrangement. I actually started to get other offers when people found out I was selling, but I was just like, I can't face it.
Yeah. Just get me out of it.
Get me out of here. And I think it's, and I think it's I now really like working with founders who are at that point of get me out of here, because there's so many better options than selling. Often selling is the worst option. If you're feeling burnt out, you are frying pan fire. You've then got 2 years of an earnout working for somebody else. If you thought you had problems when you're running your own agency, you've got no idea what you're going in for when you're then bought out, working for someone else, the whole new senior team. And, I think there should be a checklist really of thinking of things to just think through logically and clearly before you go into a sales conversation. A lot of people go into entrepreneurialism because they are terrible employees. They are mavericks. They are people who like doing it their own way. They probably have loads of ADHD. They probably are neurodiverse. And they probably have, I loved it how Adam put it, massive egos and low self-esteem, okay, which was definitely my issue. Plus ADHD, plus at that point I was going through a premature menopause at 38,
Oh my God.
which just completely made my ADHD, which was undiagnosed, but was sort of manageable, off the charts. And I just, from the moment that paper was signed, and the other agency bought my agency, it was like every negative thought I had about myself or I'd heard from anyone else went on stereo blaster around me. I've never thought I had anxiety. It's a bit like, I remember someone saying to a podcast recently, and it was like, a squirrel doesn't know it's cute, or like it doesn't, it does that because it is. I think I always had this level of self-regulation policing that was anxiety, but I was quite gutsy. I would never have identified as that. Suddenly that just was like an echo chamber. And I remember, the agency, I suddenly felt so responsible for these people I was bringing into the agency. We didn't merge as well as we hoped. And all of these things that I needed enormous energy from, I didn't sleep for 2 weeks. When people say they don't sleep, and they mean like I had a bit of a fragmented night, I literally walked around the house like awake, like a mad woman for 2 weeks without sleeping. Great. All I could hear was I remember, the agency owner had a habit of saying, "Oh, they're whip smart," or something like that. It was quite public schooly. And I was like, they're going to find out I'm not whip smart. They're going to realise it's all fake, and actually they'd done all their due diligence. Everything was fine. I won a massive contract for them in the first week. I actually was, in the first 3 days that the agency bought me, I was in bed with what I thought was norovirus. I was absolutely, I remember writing my press release for PR week with vomiting whilst doing it. And it was this like anxiety reaction to the sale. Never had anything like it. It's absolutely horrendous. And I still to this day don't really understand why it and I think, I've listened to the podcast with Adam, that he sort of got that. It was like, my ego was that business. That I was like selling myself. And suddenly I didn't have all of this armor that had been that business. And I felt like you could see me for who I was. And I didn't have that play park of a business to obsess about, play with my own P&L, do these things, make these changes. And it's about how I was really as a professional, as a PR professional, not as an entrepreneur anymore. And when I was stripped of that role of entrepreneur, I was devastated. I stopped going to, I remember I did like this 10 KSB, 10,000 small businesses that Goldman Sachs paid for me to do this like mini MBA, and I loved it. I loved my peers. I loved the networking groups that I went to with other agency founders. All of a sudden, all my budget and ability to go to those events was gone. I was no longer an entrepreneur. I was a PR employee. And I think just had a massive crisis of who am I? But under the cosh of, you've got to make your earn-out figures, you've got to do this. Actually, what's going to happen to this client that they're going to go? You need to, you've got another senior member of the team who just really doesn't like you. And for me, like, massive rejection sensitivity. Like, I go, how can I make them laughy? And I get obsessed with that. Like, it was just this maelstrom of triggers for me, just everywhere. And then we went into lockdown. So it was tricky 2 years. So
I can imagine. And every time I've heard these stories now, I'm just like, people do go through this big identity crisis because it's like, you are an entrepreneur. You were so for 10 years. It's also the autonomy, the control that you've got of your business. Yeah. And that is literally stripped away overnight. And it's suddenly like, you don't actually get to make decisions. You're not even like the CEO. Yeah. You're an employee. And it's super bizarre. Like, it's like a difference when it's like a merger. Yeah. I feel like it's when it's like a full merger and you're like part of their like advisory team and you're like actually on par and you're still making the decisions and you still control that part of your business. It's different. Yeah, but when you're completely bought out and you're exited, you are just an employee, and it's such a bizarre feeling.
You're worse than an employee because you're like an indentured servant.
They don't even want you there.
Oh no, because you have to make your own out. In order for you to get the value from your business, you've got 2, maybe 3, sometimes even 4 years of having to make specific targets every year in order to realize the value of your business. So, and also it's like,
so stressed.
It is. And if you're somebody who is not naturally results focused, which is me, then actually suddenly being driven by a number really can spike your motivation. Now, I remember getting out the spreadsheet every day and being like, come on, Holly, do it. You've got to do this. And it was like anathema to me. Like I just couldn't, I've never been someone who did it for the money. And again, like the CEO might be led and, they might be really results focused. So they're looking at you to do the same thing. And if you don't have a really strong understanding about what energizes you going into that sale, you're going to become undone. So I think there's definitely a level of preparation you can do. I think there's loads of different ways to exit your business if you're done with it and you want to do something else other than sale. And I explore lots of those with people like MBOs. So lots of different ways that actually suit people better. If you are going into a sales situation, I think there's a level of like fitness that you almost need to get into before you cross that line. Otherwise, it really is just like jumping off a cliff.
Yeah, I mean, when you're saying it sounds horrifying because like obviously most entrepreneurs run their own business because they're super passionate about it and they have a reason what drives them. Otherwise, why would you do all that and go through it all unless you were really passionate about it? But then if you're stripping all that away and you're just like purely doing it for the money, you resent it. You don't enjoy it anymore. And to me, that just sounds horrifying. So I would love to hear there's other options because I'm sure there's lots of other people. It's a tough time out there right now for every business. I'd love to hear, say if you are struggling, say if you are burnt out, say if you are just like thinking, actually, my business isn't that viable anymore.
Yeah.
What are your options?
Okay, great question. And I've been fortunate to advise people on these over the past few years. I think one of the most successful ones I've seen is where you have a more senior team around you and they are actually quite up for running the agency themselves, which enables you to start to step back and where you then can then raise them up to become the CEO. If you've got, and then actually you can say, well, look, this is the value of the agency. I'm going to carry on being a freelancer almost into the agency, but I'm going to step back and you need to pay me an amount of the value of this agency over a certain amount of time or a percentage of revenue. Come to a deal around that really suits you. That is really powerful because it's slow, it's your own agency, you're still able to go up and down into it. It's that gradual retreat out as you start to explore your options.
It's flexible because you can come back. You can,
and you end up earning quite a lot of money, and you make it and the values continue, the brand continues, the legacy that you have, and that lovely business that you've built. All of that intense satisfaction continues.
You can empower people that you've brought up to build up this brand and vision. And it's actually just really beautiful.
It's awesome. Yeah. I've seen that work quite a lot of times and work really well. And actually, 3 of the agencies that I'm thinking of that have done this have all gone into much more accelerated growth following that, and have been better agencies for the CEO departing. So it's that fresh blood, that fresh approach. And that person is sat there going, I might make that that decision differently. Yeah. I can see this there. It's really, really powerful. And then actually the person exiting gets real freedom.
Yeah.
Rather than that indentured self working for a company for the next 2 to 3 years and burning out at the end of it. Another one that works, another way of sort of getting out of an agency, without selling or closing it down, is also sort of turn it in. I think a small agency, like we're talking about 5 people, is actually just to to make everybody a partner in it. So you then become like a collection of freelancers almost. And then you start to slowly give those people value. So they start to get a percentage of things that come in. So it becomes a bit like, I think some agencies are doing this, where it almost becomes a bit, it's like a sort of guild almost. That's really nice. I think, especially if you're thinking this is going to be a lifestyle business, all of us, we all want a bit of skin in the game. Everyone's quite senior. That's a really nice way of it working. You can't, another agency I coach, like one of the founders just left and the other person took it on, and then they sort of split some of the assets that way. That works really well. I think the main thing is just to not go into anything when you're feeling burnt out. Like, it always feels like you can't take your foot off the pedal, but you inevitably can. Like, take a rest, have a think. Don't do anything when you're flooded with emotion. Bring in a temporary CEO. Bring in somebody to do that. Just close. Remember Golden Goose PR? Like, they were amazing for a time, and then she had some kids, and she just then rode it into being a freelancer, and then rode it back out again. These businesses are there to serve us, and you really have to make sure it doesn't do that. There are a whole load of other options. I'm sure Adam can talk into people as well, but I think there are there's a lot of different ways to get out your agency when you're feeling exhausted, rather than selling, which often might on the face of it seem great. Often I'd say when I've said to people, right, so you're going to get. Okay, so your agency is turning over $1 million, right? And your EBITDA is like, and you're making like 300 grand profit, 350, 400. Your agency really is going to get like $500,000 if you sell, maybe even got a bit more assets, maybe a bit more. If you were really smart about it, and you think, okay, well, you're going to have to get a 3-year earn out. Okay, if you're really smart about it, you thought, okay, I'm going to exit this company in 3 years, no matter what. Bank that profit for 3 years. It's probably going to be fairly similar.
Exactly.
And actually, you can then sell it for £1 to someone that's nothing, and you can take all that money out. You get the entrepreneur's relief. You do that, and you get to work for yourself for 3 years. I think really, unless you're getting pretty serious multiples, you get a nice story in PR week, but you have to really, when I came out of the end of my earnout, I was broken, and I think that's because I broke myself. I think I put all these conditions on myself. Like, I had 2 major surgeries that I put off. I thought, you can't do that because then you'll lose out on your, earnout capability during that time. Sure, I could have had a very reasonable conversation with my CEO where that was enabled, but for some reason I didn't. And so actually when I came out of that, I was not just burnt out like I was going in. I also ended up in a wheelchair. I just kept pushing and pushing and pushing to the point that I got Claudia Equina, my entire back, that I just kept putting off and taking more medication. And I still got a permanently numb leg, which I'll have the rest of my life as a result of it. So I think that sort of, when we have that entrepreneurial mindset, which is just push, 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 it's like any strength, it becomes our biggest weakness, and we start to use it against ourselves. And it can be the thing that, it's like the Incredible Hulk, the sort of Marvel, you push beyond the point, which is healthy.
It's so scary. And every one of these conversations that I have with like yourself, like I said, Adam, and anyone else who's exited, is just really eye-opening. And I think that what I've realized is that it's, like you said, it's driven by ego, and they want to have that, oh yeah, I'm an exited founder, we sold for X million.
Yeah.
It sounds attractive. It sounds like glamorous. It sounds like it was all worthwhile. And most of the time it's not. And yes, of course, there are these big companies who sold, like software companies, are obviously they're a bit different, and they're able to completely exit, and they do get big, like, evaluations. Yeah, that's different. But like I said, for the sake of $500,000 or whatever, and $500,000 is a lot of money, don't get me wrong, but you're not just getting it as a big check right there and then, here's £500,000, go on holiday, because that would be nice. And a lot of people would do that. But, like I said, you've got to then have 3 years of your life slaving away as an employee. you've got to assess what's worth it. And like you said, it might actually just be better to take that profit and just slowly and take some time off, take a few months off here and there. And I just think that there are other options, and exiting is not as glamorous as it looks. And I think you just got to do what's right for you and your health, because in the long run, it will be so much better.
I think so often. I mean, I absolutely agree. I think, and again, that's where, you know, an advisor might, so say you say, I'm really done with my agency. I think I want to sell. An advisor would be like, right, okay, well, here's all the number of different places you can sell. Here's some advice. This is what you need to do. This is what your EBITDA needs to look like.
Yeah.
A coach, a good coach, would be like, that's really interesting, Sabrina, that you want to sell.
Yeah.
What is it that's driving that? You know, and if you're, you know, and then if you're like, I'm actually just knackered, you know, and then you'd be like, and what else? Yeah. And what else? And, you know, and what is that? And then really unpicking that, you might find a very different set of underlying needs. Now, actually, my mum just really wants a picture on PR Week. Actually, I put 10 years of my heart and soul into this, and I feel like I need an exit to wrap a bow around this story. Yeah. You know, all like, really, like, actually, I want to pay off my mortgage and just have 2 years off my kid. What is the deep down rationale to why you want to sell? And then serve that. Then go, okay, what other ways could I get here? You know, what other, you know, so you want to take 2 years off, and so okay, what time do you want? So actually, even if you sell today, that's still going to be when your child's starting school. So what is you actually want to spend more time with them? What's the other way you can do that? You know, I think you've got to really unpick, why do you want to sell? What will that money give you? You know, why, you know, to me, when I got all that money in my bank account, actually, oh my God, it was like triggered this massive response in me that I could never have figured out before, that I would lose the money, that I'd spend it in the wrong way. It was a lot of the anxiety, because I felt guilty because people in my family didn't have that money. I felt like I didn't owe it. Like, it was an absolute nightmare that I hadn't thought about. And I think if you are thinking of selling, again, like, get in touch with a coach and really dig into what's your plan around the money, like how you're going to invest it. When it lands in your account, what will you do with it on that day? You know, I ended up taking 6 months off and going to Australia. But whilst I was really ill, it was the worst 6 months of our life as a family. So it's like all of these things. It's like, I think if I'd had my goal of, is it just that you want to go to Australia? Do you want to have a nice time in Australia? Yeah. Are you going there? You know, it's post-COVID, so it's all messed up. But I think it's getting to your really deep, like, under the ego need that you're serving with it. Because you put often you sell it, like, you put a lot of your heart and soul into this. Like, yeah, it's worth taking the time to think it through.
It is. And, you know, I've obviously been thinking about it. I'm at 10 years and I've just been thinking about it. And like, I obviously created Knobs. And I think my decision is to merge it into the thing and have a smaller thing, in-house agency, and change the model of it. Like you said about a guild, we want to do more like a collective, that sort of thing. And I think actually, it's actually so much better, because if you have lots of people who are all using their own brand, and they're more likely to do the best work, show up as their best selves, whereas employees, sometimes they just sort of do the bare minimum. That's where they have all the problems. So we're exploring new models at the moment as well. And we've had people come to us and say, we'd want to buy the agency and all your clients. And I didn't find it attractive. And hearing all these stories as well now, just for me, it's like, I don't want to pass on my brand to someone else who's just going to chop it up and destroy it as well. So I think there are other options, and I'm also at that point. I think, you know, 10 years is kind of the thing, isn't it? That's an agency world. And I think what you've said today has been so helpful. Where can other people find you if they want to have more advice from you?
So I'm on LinkedIn as Holly Tennock. I run an offsite and away day company called Wilder Work, which is https wilder.work. And, you know, I really love people jumping into my DMs in LinkedIn. That's definitely where I hang out. So yeah,
I'll put those links in the show notes. But it's been so great having you on today. Thank you for everything. And yeah, it's been a great episode. I've loved it. Thank you so much. Thanks.